Hey, what's up? Today we're taking a quick look at the image quality and some autofocus tests for the Tamron 150-500mm lens. So let's get into it. Alright, so it's been a bit of a struggle with the rainy season here, coronavirus, and just a tight schedule overall, but I was able to go out with this lens on a handful of days to shoot a range of different subjects, from just landscape type stuff to dog agility to some BMX bikers. So I tried as much as I could to put it through the paces with the Sony A7C and also the Sony A7R4. And today we're going to take a look at just a handful of photos that I think will help to show the different aspects of image quality, as well as some quick autofocus tests. If you do want to see more of an introduction to the lens, the basic specs, the design, things like that, I do have another video which I'll link down below that talks about that. And in the comments of that video, one of the things I got asked about most, of course, was autofocus and sharpness. So we'll take a look at those two things first, and then we'll move through some other sample photos to analyze some other aspects of image quality as well. Alright, so let's take a look at this first series of photos here. This is obviously shooting dog agility. And this was on the Sony A7C using eye autofocus. This particular series, this first series, was at 150mm. You can see my other settings down below. Zoom in on the dog's face and select all of these photos in the series here. Get everything centered up. And you can see here that pretty much almost all of the photos are in focus. This one right here did miss. The one right after that is not perfectly sharp, but I think it caught up pretty well. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 photos here in a row that are absolutely pin sharp right on the eyes of the dog. I think it did really, really well in this series of photos. And I can tell you right now, man, these dogs were moving fast. Got another series of photos here. These were taken at 300mm, just about 300mm. Again, wide open at that focal length. And let's zoom in on the dog's face once more. And again, you can see, I think pretty much every one of those is right spot on. These last two maybe shifted off the eyes just a little bit, but everything looks really, really good here. So I think these two series right here really sum up my experience with using this lens. Of course, these are not out at 500mm, but I think you can see what the autofocus in the lens can do. Again, I'm not usually a sports or action photographer. I do like capturing things like this. I think it's exciting and fun, and so I am practicing. I'm kind of tweaking the settings. I'm, again, relatively new to Sony, so this is kind of the first time I've got out and shot stuff like this with Sony, so I'm still kind of learning the ins and outs of the best settings for situations like these on Sony cameras. So I'm going to call it right there and just say that these series of photos are a pretty good representation of my overall experience with the lens, and hopefully that will show you what it can do. Now, of course, sharpness, edge to edge, corner to corner, that was another thing that I got asked about quite a lot in the first video in the comments. So we're going to take a look at a couple of photos, a couple of series of photos to take a careful look at sharpness, and then throughout the other photos we'll run through. Of course, we will see the sharpness there as well. So this, of course, again is on the Sony A7C, 24 megapixels. We will take a look at another series on the Sony A7R4 as well. Wide open at 150, we can see right in the center. Of course, plenty of detail, very sharp. As we move out to the edge, we've got still, I think, quite a lot of detail over here. And as we move over to a corner, it does pretty decently, still resolving quite a lot of detail. Maybe a little bit less in those extreme corners, but I think it holds up very, very well here. Honestly, I think running through every single one of these is a bit redundant because the lens does very well in terms of sharpness. So we're going to jump from 150 up just a bit to 365, somewhere more or less in the middle of the range. Going into the center, again, wide open at f5.6. This is, again, very sharp. You can see lots of detail in those branches. Over to the edge, again, it holds on to quite a lot of detail, I think. And if we move up to the corner, still very, very sharp up in here. I would say this is not the most mind-blowingly sharp lens that I've ever seen, but it's doing very well all the way out to the edges and the corners so far. So now up at 500mm, again, jumping into the center, this is 6.7 wide open for that focal length. And you can see it's hard to tell. There might be some wind blowing or something going on here as well. Again, we'll take a look at another series of photos on the Sony A7R4 as well, 61 megapixels, but it does drop off a little bit in sharpness at the long end of the focal range here. And if we move out to the edge, you can see again, it's still holding on to, I think, a good amount of detail here where it is in focus, but it does drop off a little bit from, I think, the middle of the focal range where it seems to be the strongest. And then up in the corners, it's kind of the same story. But I think still it does pretty well in terms of resolving a good amount of detail here. Let's jump over to the A7R4, look at some more demanding tests. So I've got this series of shots here, and we're just going to zoom in to the center of each one of them side by side so we can see how the sharpness changes throughout the range. And I think what becomes pretty quickly apparent here is that down on the bottom right, this is the 150mm end of the range. It's a little bit less sharp than we have in the center here in the middle of the range. And then once again at the 500mm end, it does drop off a bit from, I think this is around 400mm just behind it. Now as we go out to the edge, we'll look at 150mm first. Again, you can see here that it's not mind-bitingly sharp, but I think it resolves plenty of detail in this metal around here, the texture on this walkway or whatever it is. And then if we go down to the corner, again, it gets a little bit muddy here in the textures on the cement in the building down here in the corner, but I think it does pretty well. We've still got a good amount of detail like on this hose down here. Again, not the strongest point in the focal range, but I think it does pretty well. So we'll jump up to 300mm here and go out to the edge, and here we can see that it does, I think, a lot better. We've got lots of detail over here in this walkway. Again, lots of texture there on the rust on this part of the metal here and the texture of the cement going all the way down into the corner. Again, we're still seeing plenty of detail here on all of this metal. And then out at 500mm, again, we'll try and squeeze into the edge of the frame here, and you can see that, again, we've got lots of detail on this little texture here on the side of this metal, but it's not quite as sharp as it was just a moment ago. Going down into the corner, it's kind of the same story. We can see the rust here, we can see the bolts and everything like that, and it still is, I think, more than sharp enough. But again, overall, I would say that the middle of the focal range seems to be the absolute best, while there is a slight drop off in sharpness out at either end, at 150 or at 500. But generally very, very sharp, and there's not a huge amount of fall off in sharpness to the edge of the frame and to the corner of the frame. I think that it holds up pretty well overall. Now, I didn't overly carefully test for distortion, for example, but I think it did show up just a little bit in these photos, especially these top three. You can see, I think, a little bit more clearly as the lines on this building do bend a little bit out towards the edge of the frame. So there is a slight amount of distortion. Of course, it's very easy to fix, not a big problem, but I think this is probably the best way that you can see what's going on there in that respect. Now, while we're here, you can see I've got a series of nothing shots, and this was just to take a look at the vignette. So I was just shooting up towards the sky and trying to keep the exposure to a medium exposure, so that way we could really see that vignette as it comes in and out. So we're just going to run through these really quickly. This is out at 500mm, and I'm just going to cycle through the photos here. Just going back and forth a bit. I think you can see as it clears up pretty significantly right there, right as we stop down just from 6.7 to 7.1 right there, and then again up to F8. And then from there, it doesn't actually change all that much. So I would say that by F8, maybe F9, we're doing pretty well in terms of having a pretty clean image corner to corner here. So right now we're in the middle of the focal range. This is at 296, basically 300mm. So we'll go through that again. So from 5.6 to 6.3, this brightens up quite a bit, and then I think it clears up most of the way right around there, again at f7.1. So about a stop, 2/3 of a stop or so. I think, to get a very clean image. But the vignette is not terrible overall. And then out at 150mm, I'd say right around there. Again, f7.1 from here to here is the last really significant change that we see right there to there. So at 7.1 again, it seems to clear up pretty well. So overall, throughout the range, by about 7.1 to f8 on the long end is where we're seeing a pretty clean image in terms of vignette. One more thing that I do want to take a quick look at in this series of photos down here is if we zoom into this corner where we've got some pretty strong contrast going on there with the bright sky behind it. Let's zoom in all of these photos to the corners around here. And I just want to take a look at chromatic aberration and point out the fact that I really don't see much of an issue with chromatic aberration in any of these photos, and we'll see that again as we look through some of the more challenging photos. Here you can see, you know, a little bit here and there. We've got some fringing here and there, but it's nothing that really jumps out at you. And of course, these are uncorrected, so once you turn on some kind of lens correction profile, it's going to take care of it, no problem. Before we run through just a series of photos and take a look at a number of different image quality aspects in each of them, I just want to take a look at one more specific point, and that is the close focus. So here, this is the subject of these photos here, and I wanted to get as close as I could. So right here, we're at 500 millimeters, and this is the closest focus. If we zoom right in on the eye there, you can see it is very, very sharp at its closest focus. You've got lots of texture in the paint and everything here around the eye and in the pink paint. And even as we go out towards the edge, it does drop off a little bit here in the corner, but I think it holds up pretty well out pretty far in the frame to around here. You can still see plenty of detail on this side as well, right over here, which is pretty close to the edge of the frame. If we take a look at 150 millimeters, again, this is the closest focus, the actual magnification is fairly similar here, but if we look closely at the detail in the center, of course, it's very, very sharp. We've got lots of texture in that paint, but as we move away from the center at 150 millimeters, you can see there's quite a significant drop off in sharpness and in detail. It gets very, very muddy and strange as we move away from the center there, either on the left or the right. So it's a different type of effect, which if your subject is in the center, that's fine. But if you're looking for close focus with more or less edge-to-edge sharpness, you're going to want to focus on the longer end of the focal range in this case. Okay, so let's just take a look at a handful more photos just to take a look at some different aspects in each photo. Of course, sharpness, we'll see if we can find any chromatic aberration. And some people wanted to see what the autofocus areas look like, the bokeh. So we'll take a look at all of that in a handful of pictures that I took. And then at the end of the video, I will also show like a minute or so of just a few extra photos that I liked throughout my shooting with this lens. So yes, this was in a zoo, and I know some people don't like shooting birds in zoos because of animal rights and whatever, but this is what I had available to me. So it is what it is, I'm sorry. Zooming in here, we can see we've got a good amount of detail. Of course, you can see the hair in the feathers and everything like that, and there's some pretty stark contrast around his head here, but no major issues with chromatic aberration or anything like that. Looking all around this dark fence against the bright sky, there might be some fringing here and there, but I don't see anything that's really distracting or anything that's a major problem, of course. So here again, we've got, yes, a bird in the zoo, but you can see for those people who wanted to see some of the autofocus area, again, this is at 500 millimeters, so you can see some of that nice bokeh in the background there. There's probably about 15-20 feet of distance between this bird and the fence behind him, so maybe that'll give you some idea of what you can get. Same thing here, this is outside, so yay, hooray. For free birds. You can see, again, a good amount of detail here at 500 millimeters. Again, not the most bitingly sharp lens I've ever seen in my life, but it does very well. I'm very satisfied with this. You've got a lot of contrast, again, here on the tree, but no major fringing or anything that's causing any problems. And again, I think a good example of the bokeh for those who want to see it. There was a bit more distance here between the tree and those other trees behind that. So yeah, that's what you got, again, at 500 millimeters. I shot a lot at 500 millimeters, I'm sorry, but I will show you some towards the middle and the wide end of the range as well. Here we've got another 500 millimeter shot, and this is just fantastically sharp here. You can see lots of details on the bird. And again, I know it could possibly be sharper, but I think this does very decently in terms of detail. And then again, you can see some nice bokeh there in the background. Again, strong contrast here against that bright area behind the bird. No problems with chromatic aberration. Looks very good, very clean image overall. And one more, surprise, surprise, at 500 millimeters here. And we've got perhaps the most challenging level of contrast that we've seen so far. But again, I don't see anything. This is close to the edge of the frame. This is the top here. Yeah, that's what we got. This is, I think, a fairly challenging situation with the strong sun hitting the roof here and the bright sky behind it. all around this bell and this wire, for example, and the trees in the background. I think it does pretty well. And you can see there's a bit of atmosphere here on this day that we're kind of shooting through, so that does affect the sharpness, but I think that you can kind of get a good feel for it here as well. One more thing that I want to mention before we go through this next quick series of photos is just that in terms of flare, I tried shooting without the lens hood towards the sun, with the sun in the frame, out of the frame, and I just have nothing to show you because I really didn't find flare to be an issue whatsoever, at least in real world shooting. So that's why I haven't really commented on it yet. It's just because nothing really showed up and there's nothing really to report to you. So let's get on to these photos from the BMX event I went to a couple days ago. This first photo here is my friend trying to teach my daughter how to ride a bicycle, and just a proud dad moment here. She went here in the morning, couldn't ride a bicycle, never rode a bicycle before. By the end of the day, she was able to ride like a champ. So you can see the sharpness here is fantastic. This is at 150mm, which I think, if we're comparing the extreme ends of the lens here, 150 to 500, 150 is probably sharper than 500, but those are, again, a little bit weaker than the center of the range. But still here we're seeing plenty of detail in the text on his hat, in his eyelashes, in his hair, and everything like that. And even going down to my daughter's face, you can see all of her crazy hair frizzing out around her head there, all the hair on his arms, and really nice detail there. You've got some nice bokeh right there in the background to look at. Again, we've got the strong sun shining on these black handlebars here. Lots of contrast, lots of shiny metal, and I really don't see anything to report in terms of issues with chromatic aberration. I should probably just stop saying that because it's going to be true for the rest of the photos as well. Here again, once more, I just wanted to show you more of a kind of closer backgrounds autofocus area. This is at 150. You can see the tree behind them here, some of the plants on the ground here, as well as a little bit more of a distant background at that wide end of the focal range. You can see there, so judge it how you will. I just wanted to show you this one really quickly here. I know it's in the center of the frame, so maybe the strongest part of the frame, but this is probably the most challenging that I could see, with a strong sunlight shining right on that black text on a white shirt. And again, no major problems, not perfect, but I think very clean compared to what I would expect to see in a shot like this. So here again, this is kind of, I guess, another example of the autofocus doing its thing. Obviously a challenging photo, something I needed to snap off and grab quickly as he jumped out of that ramp, but definitely nice and sharp. This is at 154mm, and again, around the outside here, nothing major, very clean image, very sharp image, and a good performance from the autofocus. Drawing to a close here, I apologize for the expression here, but I just wanted to once again show you 161mm, very, very sharp. You got lots of hair and detail and everything like that. And you can see again an example of the bokeh, the autofocus area in the background towards the wider end of the focal range. And here's one more that we have to close the video out with as a proud dad of her riding the bike all by herself. And you can see there's a bit of a ramp behind her. She did come down that by herself. So first day ever riding a bike, she's going up and coming down ramps. Now I have to buy her her own pink BMX bike. But again, you can see here, I guess, an example of the bokeh in the background. Some trees there as it goes around closer to the edge. Not a huge amount of that swirling effect that you see on some lenses for the bokeh. It's not that bad here. And you can see, you know, when you've got people or other things in the background, about how much you could expect to blur that out. For one more final note here, I'll show you some quick focus throws at the wide end and the long end of the focal range so you can judge focused breathing, since some people were asking about it. I don't have any similar lenses to compare it to, but here you are. Alright, so hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, but I just wanted to show you my real world experience with this lens, and hopefully that was helpful for you. My general judgment of this lens is that, as I expect with most Tamron lenses recently, it performs very, very well. The image quality is very strong. The autofocus seemed to do very well. Again, I'd like to try that out a bit more in the near future. But it seemed to do very well, and it didn't feel like it was holding me back. I never struggled with backlighting or low lighting or anything like that. It handled a lot of situations, and it felt like a native lens. I did send the lens back, and I'm a little bit torn about that, whether or not I want to buy it for myself. Like I said, I'm not an action or sports photographer, but having this lens for a month or so, I did feel like there were a lot of situations where I did want to bring it out. Even something like my kids' sports festival at school, we can't get that close to that, and that lens really came in handy in that situation. I can't show you those photos because of privacy issues, but I'm really strongly considering buying this lens. It's very affordable, I think, for the reach that it gives you and for the performance that it gives you. It was a fun lens to have, and I think just having it here made me want to learn more about sports and action in nature or wildlife type photography. So I might pick it up and practice a bit more. And I recommend you do too. If you liked what you saw here and that is your type of photography, something you're interested in, this is a great lens to get your hands on. So like I said, I have sent it back, but I am hoping to get my hands on it again. So if you have any remaining questions or comments, please do let me know down below. Maybe it's something I've tested and I just haven't reported here. I can get back to you on that. And if not, I can try and test it again in the future. But if you like this video or you found it helpful, please do consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribing if you haven't already. And as always, thank you for watching.